The alarm on the pediatric ICU monitor refused to stop screaming. The sound cut through the sterile hospital hallway like a knife, sharp and relentless. The air smelled of bleach and desperation, that strange combination of clinical cleanliness and human fear. Inside the room, a 9-year-old girl with tangled brown hair lay motionless, her small chest rising and falling in shallow, uncertain breaths. Her name was Arabella, and she was fading fast. The doctors had been clear. Her only hope was a blood type so rare they called it a miracle match. Outside the glass, a woman in an expensive but wrinkled blouse paced back and forth, her heels clicking an anxious rhythm against the tile floor. Elena Dare had built empires, closed deals that made headlines, and commanded boardrooms full of men twice her age. But none of it mattered now. Her niece was dying, and all her money, all her power could not manufacture a miracle. But somewhere across the city, in a small apartment above a repair shop, a different kind of scene was unfolding. The space was cluttered but warm, filled with the smell of old wood, motor oil, and something baking in a toaster oven. A man with grease-stained hands sat at a sticky kitchen table, helping his son with homework. This was Mason Rudd. His hands were calloused, his jeans worn thin at the knees, and his coffee tasted like gasoline because he couldn't afford the good stuff. But his son, Jace, was laughing at something on the page, and that sound filled the room better than any luxury. Mason was a single father, a man who had learned that grief and gratitude could live side by side. He never complained about the unpaid bills or the refrigerator that hummed too loud. He found happiness in the scraps, the music of his son's laughter, the weight of a wrench in his hand, the quiet satisfaction of fixing something broken. But Mason carried a bruise on his soul that time had faded but never fully erased. Years earlier, before the repair shop, before the single-father life, he had worked as a contractor for a high-end firm. He was good at his job, better than most, but in that world, talent mattered less than polish. One afternoon, he had been called to a glass tower downtown, a building so clean it felt like a museum. He was there to fix a technical issue, nothing more. But as he walked through the lobby carrying his toolbox, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper heels stopped him. Her name was Elena Dare, daughter of the billionaire CEO. She looked at him like he had tracked mud onto a marble floor, even though he hadn't touched anything. In front of an entire boardroom, with executives in $1,000 suits watching, Elena had mocked him. She called him warehouse trash. She said he was a charity case the company kept around to feel good about themselves. Her words were precise, surgical, designed to cut deep. Mason had stood there, gripping his toolbox, feeling his face burn while people laughed nervously. He didn't fight back. He didn't beg. He just turned and walked out, the glass doors sliding shut behind him. For months afterward, he couldn't look at the city skyline without feeling small. That was the day Mason learned how cruel people could be when their wealth made them forget their humanity. That was the day he decided he would never let anyone make him feel that way again, and he would never become that kind of person himself. Years passed, and Mason built a different life. It was humbler, yes, but it was real. He woke up early, worked with his hands, came home tired but honest. He raised Jace alone after his wife left, and he never once blamed the world for his struggles. One bright afternoon, he found himself at a blood donation clinic, something he did every few months just to feel useful. He didn't have money to give or power to share, but he had blood, healthy, strong, ordinary blood. Or so he thought. As the nurse slid the needle into his arm, a computer database somewhere across town flashed his name, Mason Rudd, type O negative with a rare antigen pattern that matched only one person in the entire region, a little girl named Arabella who was running out of time.
When the nurses called him with the news, they expected him to ask for compensation or at least details. But Mason didn't ask for a single dollar. He didn't negotiate or hesitate. His answer was a simple yes, spoken so quietly the nurse almost missed it. He drove to the hospital in his rattling truck, wearing his usual work clothes, his hands still carrying the shadow of grease. He didn't know whose niece he was saving. He didn't care. A child was dying, and he could help. That was all that mattered. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Elena Dare stood watching through the glass as the donor was brought in. She had been there 3 days straight, sleeping in chairs, praying to a God she had long ignored. Her brother was out of the country, unreachable. Her sister-in-law was sedated in another room. Elena was alone with her guilt. She watched the donor walk down the hallway, a man in a worn flannel shirt, boots that saw better days, and a calm expression that seemed out of place in a place of panic. At first, she only recognized the jawline. Then he turned slightly, and the past hit her at all once. Her knees nearly buckled. The man she treated like garbage, the man she mocked in front of an entire boardroom, the man she called warehouse trash, he was the only person on earth who could save her family. Shame stabbed her so sharply she gasped aloud. She remembered every cruel word she had spat at him in that skyscraper office. She remembered the way he had walked out without looking back, carrying his toolbox like a shield. And now here he was, carrying something far more precious. Mason looked up through the glass and saw her. For a long second their eyes locked. He saw the expensive woman from the boardroom, but she looked different now, hollow, frightened, stripped of all her armor. She looked shocked, ashamed, maybe even broken, and Mason simply nodded. There was no anger in his expression, no bitterness, just a tired, steady acknowledgement. He didn't wave or smile, he just nodded, as if to say, "I remember, and I'm here anyway." Then he turned and followed the nurse into the preparation room. Elena pressed her hand against the glass, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She wanted to run after him, to fall on her knees, to say something that would undo the past, but the words wouldn't come. They were stuck somewhere behind the wall of her pride, which even now refused to fully crumble. The transfusion took place in a quiet room filled with machines that beeped and hummed. Mason lay on a cot, watching his blood flow through plastic tubes, knowing it was going to a little girl he had never met. He thought about Jace, about how he would feel if his own son were lying in that bed. He thought about fear and helplessness and the strange mercy of strangers. On the other side of the hospital, Arabella's color began to return like a sunrise pushing back the night. Her cheeks, which had been ghostly pale, flushed pink. Her breathing steadied. The monitors that had been screaming fell silent, then settled into a gentle rhythm. Doctors smiled and whispered to each other. Nurses wiped tears from their eyes. The miracle had arrived in the form of a mechanic with dirty hands and a quiet heart. While the family celebrated, while Elena's brother finally answered his phone and wept with relief, while hospital staff exchanged handshakes and congratulations, Mason quietly filled his paperwork to leave. He moved with the peace of someone who had already let go of old pain. He didn't expect thanks. He didn't want recognition. He had done what needed to be done, and now he wanted to go home and make dinner for his son. But as he walked toward the exit, Elena saw him. She rushed forward, her heels slipping on the polished floor, her voice caught in her throat. She reached out a hand, opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The guilt was too heavy, the shame too fresh. Mason paused for just a moment, looked at her with those tired, steady eyes, and then walked out the door. He didn't slam it, he didn't look back, he just left. For days afterward, Elena sank into a silence she couldn't escape. She went through the motions, visiting Arabella, answering phone calls, pretending everything was fine, but inside something had cracked open. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her life, that she was successful and feared, but not kind. People respected her power, but no one loved her. She had built an empire of glass, and now she saw how easily it could shatter. She thought about Mason, not the man she mocked, but the man she met in that hospital hallway. The man who had given his blood without asking for anything in return. The man who had looked at her without hatred. She realized she owed him something she had never given anyone in her life, a real apology. It took her 3 days to find him. She hired no investigators, made no calls to powerful friends. She simply remembered the name on the donation form and searched online until she found a small repair shop across town. The next morning, she put on sweatpants and a hoodie, no makeup, no jewelry,